Films in Focus with David Sterritt is underwritten by The Movie House, your destination for first-run Hollywood and independent movies, and a digital portal to the Met Opera, National Theatre Live, and special events worldwide in Millerton, New York, and on the web, themoviehouse.net.
David Sterritt is the editor-in-chief for the Quarterly Review of Film and Video, contributing writer at Cineast, film professor at the Maryland Institute College of Art, and Robin Hood Radio's very own critic. He joins us weekly. The films The Human Voice, Hope, and The Man Who Sold His Skin. Once again, a very intriguing first sentence, I would think.
Yep, you could put those titles together and make half a novel, I suppose. But the films themselves are quite different from one another. And the first one is one that I talked about briefly months ago when it was shown as part of the New York Film Festival virtual edition of last year. And now it's actually opened up more widely for streaming and theatrical showing and so forth. So I want to just come back to it because it's an excellent movie. It's also a little bit unusual for us because it's a short film. It's only about a half hour long, but it was made by a very great filmmaker, the great Spanish filmmaker Pedro Almodovar, and it's called The Human Voice, and it stars the truly, totally, absolutely great Tilda Swinton, who is one of my favorite actors and who is just such a phenomenally talented person, and who I've had the pleasure of talking with more than once in my time, and she's just amazing. And she is the star of this, and on top of that, she's almost the only character of this, because The Human Voice is basically a very updated adaptation of a famous play by Jean Cocteau, the legendary French playwright and novelist and everything else, an artist who covered pretty much all the bases of art. And Cocteau's play was made into a very famous opera by the great French composer Francis Poulenc. And anyway, it's been around for a long time. Every once in a while, people want to pick up and do an adaptation of The Human Voice. There's also a very important film version, Italian film version from many years ago, starring Anna Magnani. Anyway, this is the Tilda Swinton version, and The Human Voice is very much about the human voice. It has a pretty simple story. It is about a woman who's basically on the phone or waiting for the phone or just involved with the phone while she waits for her lover, who was supposed to come back and get his suitcases, to call up, and she hopes maybe return and pick up their relationship where it left off, but this is not to be. So that's what it's about. It's about this woman who is just watching the clock and watching her phone, and that's it. And she's pretty much the only character. Almodovar's version opens it out just a tiny little bit, and so we have some other people in it. There's also a dog who gives a nice little performance in the movie, but mainly it is Tilda Swinton's film. And I'll say about Tilda Swinton what I used to say about Lily Taylor. There's very few actors who I could say this about. One of these years, I expect that Tilda Swinton is, in 1 year, she's going to be in one movie where she plays Marilyn Monroe, and she's going to be in another movie where she plays Abraham Lincoln. And in both of them, she is going to be completely convincing. I think she can do anything, is the point I'm making. And she never disappoints. And here, once again, is a short movie, again, only about a half hour long, but it is very much a showcase for Tilda Swinton, but she doesn't show off in this showcase. She just gives a very, very lovely, nuanced performance of a little semi-suspenseful movie. And anyway, I just totally recommend it. Again, only about a half hour long, but well worth catching up with. It's also Almodovar's first film in English. It's mostly in English, so I guess he decided to start modestly on this phase of his career because, again, it's a short film. But it's very nice that he is now expanding his language repertoire a bit. Our second film today, Hope, is a movie by a Norwegian filmmaker named Maria Sodal, and it is a movie that doesn't have tremendous amounts of hope in it, but it's really quite a fascinating story, and it's just a beautifully acted movie, and it's on a very dark-toned subject, although the ending is, I'm going to give a little spoiler here, the ending is, let's say, neither hopeless nor hopeful. It's just an ending, but as I will explain in a moment, the movie's very existence is a kind of a spoiler because it is based completely on the memories of Maria Sodal, something that happened to her not that many years ago, which is that she was diagnosed with a terminal illness, an inoperable cancer that could not be cured, cannot be healed, and it is going to kill her. Now, it becomes, as the movie proceeds, it becomes clear that maybe things are not quite as hopeless as I just made it it sound and as her physicians made it sound. And since the movie is based completely on the real experiences of the woman who wrote and directed it, the very fact that the movie is out there, that we can now all look at the movie, indicates that she survived this horrible ordeal. But at the end of the movie, she's just still coming near the end of it. It's not 1,000% clear how things will turn out. But as I said, it's a movie with not a lot of hope in it, but certainly it is not hopeless. And in real life, things turned out to be okay. Maria Sodal, again, wrote and directed the movie, and the main character, whose name is Anya, is very much based on her. And her husband is the other main character, and he is played by the very, very great and extremely major and international actor Stellan Skarsgård, who is just such a wonderful performer, and he delivers a terrific job of just underplays this beautifully, a very subtle and beautiful performance in all ways. So what we have, and by the way, they have any number of children, because he's got a bunch from a first marriage who are partly grown up, and then they have some very young ones of their own. So it's a complicated life they have. They're both involved in the arts. She is a dance choreographer. Of course, the real character is a filmmaker, but Anya in the movie is a choreographer, and her husband is a theatrical producer. And she gets hit with this horrifying diagnosis very early in the movie. And it appears that she is going to die. And so then the movie goes into the kinds of things that this sort of film does have to go into. How are they going to tell their children? How are they going to prepare their children for this? How are they going to prepare themselves for this? How is this going to affect their own relationship with each other? And the movie goes through all of those things. And there are friends and relatives who have secondary roles in the movie. But mainly the film is about Anya and Tomas, and to some extent about their children, and about how they get through this horrifying ordeal which this poor woman has to face. And yes, there are doctors and there are diagnoses and all of this and changing reports. And an extra complication in this film is that it all takes place over the end of the year holidays, Christmas and New Year's, when of course it's really hard to get medical attention. I know from recent experience it can be hard to get dental attention when you have some sort of an emergency over that period right between Christmas and New Year's. And that's another hurdle that is faced by Anya and Tomas, because as at one point he has to say to one of the people at a hospital who says, "We just can't help you because the specialist won't be here for a few days." Well, don't people die over the holidays? And of course they do, but it turns out that even in Scandinavia, with all their terrific social safety net and so forth, the holiday period can be a very dicey one. In any case, that's just an extra complication in the movie. The main attractiveness of the movie comes from the acting, especially by the two principals. Andrea Brand-Hovig plays Anya, and Stellan Skarsgård plays Thomas, and they are just absolutely sensational. They're beautiful, subtle, nuanced performances that never push anything in your face, but let you discover the emotions as the movie kind of proceeds from moment to moment. Again, it's not a movie with a lot of hope in it. A lot of it is very downbeat, and there's a lot of just sort of fear, again, very subtly expressed by these people. But, life is going through a horrifying turn here. But again, the movie lets you discover these things for yourself, and it's a beautifully underplayed movie. It was actually Norway's submission for the Academy Awards that are coming up very soon this year, but it did not make the final cut. But it's a very, very worthy film, and it's going to be available very widely. And I really do recommend it. If you want to see a good, thoughtful drama about real grown-up people facing real grown-up problems of the kind that exist in the real world that are not the fantastical kind of stuff that Hollywood is constantly thrusting at us, then this is definitely a movie to see. And I got to say, at the moment, we really do have some movies which deal with illness and with great threats to the quality of life, which are beautifully done. There's the movie with Anthony Hopkins called The Father, which is one of my very favorite movies of recent months. There is the movie with Stanley Tucci, Supernova, which is, again, both of those movies are about somebody with dementia. And now we have Hope, which is about a woman who is younger than them and has a different kind of problem. And they're all thoughtful, interesting movies that do not leave you with a feeling of despair, but let you think and share in the experiences of people who are going through these horrible things, which of course will affect many of us as the years go by. And anyway, Hope is a very, very good movie, and I really think that people ought to check it out because very, very solid stuff. Our final movie for today is about an area of life about which you know a great deal, Jill. It is about the art world and the art market and so forth, and it's called The Man Who Sold His Skin. And this is one of the movies that is competing right now for the Academy Award for Best International Film, and we'll see if it wins. I personally think that it's an excellent contender, and I think it's one of the best movies I've seen in quite a while. It's really a fascinating film. It is a film that comes to us from the Middle East, although if you look at the countries that contributed to the making of this film, I'm just going to read the list here. Again, these are not only countries that where like the movie was shot, but they're countries where resources of technicians or money came from. Tunisia, France, Belgium, Germany, Sweden, Turkey, a long list of places. But it's a film that has its main feet sunk in the Middle East. And the main character is a man with a pretty simple name. His name is Sam Ali. And he is played in a terrific performance by Yahya Mayani. And he is just an ordinary guy who is at a horrible, horrible fix. He lives in Syria, where there is war and horror and terror and all kinds of threats of everything from the domestic forces to the international forces. He and his family would just love to get out of the country right away, but they're stuck. There's really no other way to do this. So what is he going to do? And suddenly a really bizarre offer. By the way, he's a very ordinary guy. And the way this movie sort of kicks into gear is when he's freeloading off the food at a gallery opening. But Sam, a very ordinary guy, and he would love to get out of the country, but he's got no money, no resources. And then somebody makes him a really strange offer. An artist approaches him and says, I will create an artwork on your back, with methods involving tattooing. And when it's done, your back will be my property, and I'll have certain rights that we'll have written into a contract where I'll get to exhibit it, and you'll give me a certain amount of time on a regular basis, and I will pay you a fortune for this. You will make a lot of money for this. So Sam Ali accepts this deal, and he has this elaborate artwork tattooed on his back. And then he's got to do things like sit in a museum where people can come by and look at his back. So all of this is just sort of how the movie gets started. Other characters. The artist is a very major character in the movie. His art dealer, whose name is Soraya, who is played, by the way, by the movie's biggest star, Monica Bellucci. She is a very major character in the movie, and she is a very cold, icy woman who is just involved in sort of keeping an eye on Sam all the time and making sure that nothing happens. In the meantime, he also has a woman he is in love with, Sam does, a woman he is in love with named Abir, and he's separated from her, and she's getting married to somebody else. And this is all connected not only with his situation now being, in a way, the property, that's in quotes, of the artist, but also with his desire to get out of the country, et cetera, et cetera. It sounds like a complicated story. It really isn't. It's always clear as a bell, and it's just so interesting. One way that the artist talks Sam into agreeing to this arrangement, where Sam will, in fact, have this work of art put on his back and will be, in a strange sort of a way, a contractual possession of the artist. One way the artist talks him into this is by saying that nowadays people can't travel if they don't have the right kind of passport. So what it is that he puts, the work of art that he puts on Sam's back, is a passport, an international passport, the kind of passport that a Middle Easterner needs to get into Europe. So by turning himself into a commodity, by turning his back, his skin, his body into something that can in a certain way be bought and sold, Sam is gaining more freedom and more sort of personhood than he had without this passport tattooed on his back, because now, at least in theory, he could move around with this passport. So it's very, very fascinating kind of conundrum that the movie raises. How is it that by turning yourself into a kind of commodity, you could actually free yourself from all kinds of constraints and limitations in the modern world? Isn't that an odd, peculiar sort of a thing? There's a whole lot of stuff going on in the movie that deal with the works of art and contracts and how you deal with these things and how you buy and sell these things. And as fantastical as it sounds, as remarkable as it sounds, that a person might have a work of art tattooed onto his skin, and then his skin would, in a way, become a work of art and would become, in a way, something to be bought and sold, is based on a real case that happened in the late 2000s. There was a Belgian artist named Wim Delvoye, and by the way, he plays a cameo in the movie, who on a person named Tim Steiner, Wim Delvoye, did something like 40 hours of tattooing, creating an elaborate artwork on this person, which was then sold to a German collector for an enormous amount of money. And part of that deal is that when the live canvas, Tim Steiner, dies, his back will be skinned off his body and framed. So all of this has roots in very, very real art world practice. So, Jill, I'm not sure if in your years as an art dealer you ever dealt with anything like this, but it makes for a fascinating movie, not only dramatically interesting with a very surprising ending, but just a movie that raises all kinds of really interesting philosophical conundrums. And I enjoyed it as a drama. I enjoyed it as a real world conundrum to think about. And I think it's a really good movie. And I think it actually has an excellent chance to win the Academy Award coming up very soon. So that is my internationalized story this week, Jill.
For which we thank you, as ever and always, David Sterritt. Films in Focus. The films, the human voice, hope, and the man who sold his skin.